Sometimes I think life doesn't really show up the way that we expect it to. Like, we imagine things being this straight line. You do the right things and things go well. You avoid problems, life stays peaceful. You make right choices and everything kind of just works. But that's not really how it feels when you're actually in it, because sometimes the things that feel like problems aren't actually problems at all. And I think that's what I've been thinking a lot about recently. There's this quote that I have heard from Abraham Hicks, and it says something like, sometimes your inner being will call you into something that you would call a problem in order to get you to ask a question that will serve you in a stronger and more powerful way. And when I first heard that, I kind of paused for a second, because at first it sounds a little backwards. Like, why would anything good come from something that we label a problem? Why wouldn't growth just feel like progress? Why wouldn't it just feel easy or obvious? But the more I thought about it, the more it started to make a little bit more sense in a weird sort of way, because I think a lot of the time what we call in quotes problems are actually just situations that force us to grow in directions we wouldn't have necessarily chosen on our own. Like, if everything stayed comfortable, most of us wouldn't change. And really, that's the definition of change, if you think about it. But we would just stay in the same patterns, the same thoughts, the same routines, the same versions of ourselves. But then something happens, something feels off and something breaks, something doesn't go how we thought that it would, and suddenly we're asking questions we weren't asking before. Questions like, why did this happen? What am I supposed to do now? What do I actually want? What even matters to me? And I think that that's what this quote is pointing to, that sometimes the, in quotes again, problem isn't there to punish you or slow you down. It's actually there to wake something up in you. It forces attention onto parts of your life or yourself that you weren't looking at before. And I don't know, I guess that's kind of just something interesting, because maybe it means that life is happening to us. Maybe it's also happening through us, per se. Like, there's a version of us, a deeper version or inner version, whatever you want to call it, that kind of deep down knows where we're going, even if we don't. And it gently pushes us in directions that we wouldn't normally go, even if that push doesn't necessarily feel comfortable, even if we would label it something as stressful or confusing or frustrating. And I think that's where the second quote that I have in mind comes in also. Because the other thing that I heard is, in quotes, you cannot wield the universe's energy if your fists are clenched. And that one honestly hit a little bit different, because immediately I started thinking about what that actually looks like in real life. Like, seriously, imagine trying to receive anything when your hands are completely closed. You can't grab onto anything new. You can't take anything in. You're just holding on tightly, as strong as you can, to whatever is there. And I feel like we do that a lot emotionally too, without even realizing it. And we cling to how things should be, or how we think things should be, I guess. And we cling to the outcomes, the control, or the certainty. And we also, I guess, cling to the idea that if we just try hard enough, or we think hard enough, or I guess plan well enough, that we could prevent anything uncomfortable from happening. But life doesn't really work like that, and I have learned that as I have been growing up. And the tighter that we hold on to how we think things should go, the less room there is for anything new to actually come in. And I don't think that means we just stop caring or stop trying. I think it's more like the difference between holding something tightly out of fear versus holding it lightly with trust. You can still care about your life, you can still care about your goals, you could still want things, but there's a difference between wanting something and needing to control every single step of how it happens. And that's where a lot of the stress comes from, not from life itself. And I don't know, I think I've noticed that in my own life too sometimes. Like, when I'm really focused on how something should go, again in quotes, should go, I can kind of feel myself getting tense about it. Almost like I'm trying to force everything into a specific shape, per se. And then ironically, the more I try to force it, well, you guessed it, the more stuck, everything fails. So going back to the second quote, I think that's what it's really trying to get at. It's not that you stop caring, it's just more that you stop clenching so tightly to how things have to look. Because when your fists are clenched, you're not really open to anything new. You're just holding on, and I think that shows up in life in ways we don't always notice. Like sometimes it shows up in creativity or relationships, or it shows up in goals or plans, or even just the way that we think about ourselves, because we decide really early sometimes what something is supposed to look like, and we have this idea of how something is supposed to look and do and feel, and how something is supposed to figure itself out and play itself out, I guess. And we spend so much energy trying to make reality match that picture that we have, even when reality is trying to move us somewhere a little bit different sometimes. And I think that's where a lot of frustration comes from, not because life is wrong, but because we are trying to force it into a version that maybe isn't aligned with us anymore. And I've been thinking a lot about that in terms of growth as well, because growth doesn't feel always like expansion at first, sometimes more like uncertainty and confusion, or like things are getting worse before they get better. But maybe that's just what it feels like, I guess, when you're letting go of something you were gripping so tightly onto for such a long time. And I also think that that's where that idea connects us back to the first quote that I mentioned as well. Because if your inner being, or whatever you want to call that deeper part of you, is guiding you, then sometimes it might guide you into situations that don't necessarily make immediate sense. Situations that feel uncomfortable, or that feel like, in quotes once more, why is this happening to me right now? But maybe the purpose isn't the situation itself. Maybe the purpose of it is to make you ask. Maybe it's to make you ask the question, or get you to ask a question, because the questions that you ask in uncomfortable moments, specifically those uncomfortable moments, are usually very different from the questions that you ask when everything is going easy and everything is flowing super well. It's basically how we expand and how we learn and how we grow. Because when everything is easy, you don't really question much. But when something feels off, you start to ask deeper things like, what do I actually want? Or what am I doing this for? Or is this even aligned with me anymore? And I think that those kinds of questions are super powerful, because they pull you out of the autopilot that you've been in for such a long time. And they make you actually look at your whole life instead of just moving through it. And maybe that's what that quote meant, I guess, when it said, in order to get you to ask a question that will serve you in a stronger, more powerful way. Not that problems are good, but that awareness comes from contrast, and contrast isn't always comfortable, but it is clarifying. And that's something that I have noticed more and more recently, that even things I would have once called bad or wrong or not how I wanted to go sometimes end up actually becoming the exact thing that make me think differently afterwards. It shifts me in a new direction of how I see things. I don't think that means everything is, in quotes, meant to happen in a rigid way. I do think, though, that it means that life is always responding to where you are internally. So your thoughts, your expectations, your emotional state, your focus. And that's where the second quote also comes back into play to make more sense too. At risk of sounding like a broken record, in quotes once more, you cannot wield the universe's energy if your fists are clenched. Because if you're consistently in resistance, consistently trying to force outcomes and tighten around what you think should happen, you're not really allowing space for anything else. You're not really in flow with anything. You're not letting anything flow. You're just pushing. You're just pushing everything away and tightening your grasp on that vision that you have. And I think a lot of people mistake that pushing for progress, but there's a difference between aligned movement and forced movement. One feels like things are unfolding with you, and the other feels like you're fighting everything just to make it happen. And I do think that that's part of just growing up, or growing in general, is starting to know that difference, and not just intellectually, but actually feeling it, actually noticing when something feels tight and noticing when something feels a little bit more open, because the open feeling is usually where things start to just flow again. Even if it doesn't make sense logically yet, even if you don't fully understand the why and you are just questioning everything, I do think that that is one of the hardest parts, because letting go of control, like I mentioned earlier, feels like uncertainty, and uncertainty is comfortable. But at the same time, it's also where everything new comes from. Because if everything is already known, nothing would ever change. We would never grow. And I think that's kind of the balance of life, is holding intention without gripping onto it so tight, and caring without controlling, and moving forward without forcing every single step, and trusting that even when something feels like it's not going the way you expected, it might actually still be moving you somewhere important that you might just not be able to see at the time, even if you come to understand it afterwards. And I think to kind of bring that part together, it just comes back to a simple idea that life isn't really asking you to have everything figured out. It's not asking you to control every outcome, and it's not asking you to avoid every uncomfortable moment. It's just asking you to stay open when things feel confusing and things feel uncertain, even when you don't fully understand what's happening yet, because maybe openness is what allows you to actually receive the things that were actually meant for you. Again, even if you are not actually able to see it in the current position that you're in. And also, maybe those clenched fists don't leave much room for anything else to come in either. And I think the more that I sit with all of this, the more it stops feeling like some huge, complicated idea, and it just starts feeling a little bit more like life, like actual everyday life, because it's not really about understanding everything perfectly, as I have been saying. It is more about noticing what is happening while you're in it, noticing when you're tense and when you're forcing something and when you're not forcing something, and noticing when you're trying to control something that probably doesn't even need to be controlled that much, and noticing that you're actually okay, but you don't feel okay because your mind is somewhere else trying to fix something that isn't even happening right now. And that can go both ways for the past and the future. And I think that's again where the clenched fist idea really shows up in real life, because it's not always dramatic. It can be something subtle. It's like, I guess, like overthinking a conversation that already happened, or trying to predict every possible outcome before you even take the next step, or waiting until you feel perfectly ready before you do something, even though that feeling of being ready never fully arrives. Let's be completely honest, it never really does. You always just have to start, and then it comes after. And the more I think about it, the more I realize how much energy that actually takes. Just holding on so tightly to everything in your head all the time, trying to manage every single possibility and every direction that life can go, when in reality, life is moving whether you like it or whether you don't. And I think there's something kind of freeing, I guess, in admitting that and accepting that, not in a giving up way, but in a way of, okay, I don't actually have to control all of this. And control may just often be something that we reach for when things feel uncertain. It could be a way of feeling safe or trying to feel safe. But the irony is, the more tightly that you hold on to things and the more tightly that you try to control everything, the less present you actually feel in it, just like I've been reiterating. And then you miss the thing that you were trying so hard to make go right in the first place, because you were so caught up in it, and you were so caught up in all of those different versions. And I don't know, I guess that's something I've been slowly actually comprehending and learning lately, that presence might actually matter more than perfection. Like being in your life instead of constantly trying to calculate it. And that also, once again, brings us back to the very first idea, the very first quote, about how sometimes things can feel like problems or be labeled as problems, and they are actually just moments that shift your attention. Because when you're forced out of autopilot, you start to see things differently. You start to ask those different questions, and you realize what actually matters to you and what doesn't matter to you. And even though that process can feel, once again, uncomfortable sometimes, it feels also honest. Like you're actually meeting your life instead of just passing through it. And I don't know about you guys, but that's definitely something I don't want to miss. I don't think life is supposed to be something to figure out all at once and then just execute it perfectly. I think that it's something you have to keep adjusting to, even as ironic as it is for me, which is such a funny thing because I am an overthinker. I am someone who tries to come up with all of the different possibilities of what if this happens or what if that happens, and I am scared for the future, I regret the past, or like all of these different things. It's kind of funny because irony in it is funny. But it's something to keep learning from. It's something that we can keep experiencing in real time, and maybe that's part of what the point is. Again, not to control it, not to have any certainty, complete certainty, I guess, but to have awareness and to have openness and to stay open to everything happening, even when it feels uncertain and even when it feels like you don't fully know what's next, because that's where things actually start to line up and that's where things start to open up. Not when things have been planned perfectly or go perfectly to how you think they should or how you have envisioned them, I guess, but when you're willing to loosen your grip just enough to let life move a little, or I guess show you where it's going or taking you. I guess that just depends how you look at it. But yeah, that is something that I am learning right now and comprehending, is just to not to stop caring, not to stop trying, but to just stop holding everything so tightly that I can't experience it while it's happening, and not being too caught up in the moment before it's gone, because we only have one life, and maybe the point was never to control the whole thing. Maybe it was just to be here for it and live it and roll with the punches, trust our gut, trust our intuition, and see where life takes us. With that, if you are comfortable, please leave your thoughts down in the comments. I would absolutely love to talk to every one of you and hear what your thoughts are. And if you've made it this far to the video, it probably means you ended up liking it. So consider liking and subscribing. It helps me out so much. Leave that comment down below and I will see you in the next video. Bye everybody!